As a last bit of personal input I want to share with you in this semester, I want to talk to you about survival skills in the profession. I know you have heard this material from time to time in different courses, and in fact, if you've had classes with me previously, some of this material may look familiar to you. But I've found in all the years of my practice that social workers often need to be reminded again and again and again about self-care and the need for taking care of personal issues and personal lives in the course of helping others. And so it's worth going over these one more time, and I hope you find some useful things in here to carry with you as you leave me after the end of this semester. As we work with a system, an individual, or a group, we can never stand outside of it entirely. For whatever reason people choose to enter the human services, they must know that they cannot avoid involvement of self in practice. An abiding sense of moral responsibility and a willingness to face and come to terms personally with basic issues involving people are essential. This little quote comes from Joanne Levine's Working with People, a little book that much of the material in this lecture is drawn from. When we enter into a system through individual or group or family work or an agency system, we become a part of that system. We affect the balance established in the system, no matter how hard we try to stay objective and no matter how hard we try to surrender decisions to our clients and their families themselves. When we facilitate change, we affect the system and we're a part of that system. But we have to maintain objectivity while we do this. Of course, a question we often encounter in the field is, does change come from within or does it come from without? In other words, can we influence the clients in such a way that they make changes, or do the clients have to find within themselves the motivation, the desire, the capacity to change? Kessler said in Yogi and the Commissar, one leads to the other and both are essential. There are three terms that are complementary and yet also distinct from each other when we talk about professional stress. You're familiar with each of these in one way or another. Burnout is a term that we often hear used, and it's been in heavy use since sometime in the 1970s or 80s at least. And it describes the physical and emotional exhaustion that workers experience when they have low job satisfaction and they feel powerless and overwhelmed at work. Burnout doesn't necessarily mean that our view of the world has been damaged or that we've lost the ability to feel compassion for others, but it's just that perhaps we're just weighed down too much by the duties at work or by the tasks that seem impossible to complete. Burnout has a bit of a negative connotation to it, and I want to be careful that we don't throw that term around too loosely because it does somehow imply a sense of personal failure. And I think we should look for other variations on burnout when we look at what is happening to us. Another term that we hear sometimes is compassion fatigue, and this refers to the profound emotional and physical erosion that takes place when helpers are unable to refuel and regenerate. This is different from burnout. And vicarious trauma describes a profound shift in worldview that occurs in helping professionals when they work with clients who have experienced trauma. Helpers notice that their fundamental beliefs about the world are altered and possibly damaged by being repeatedly exposed to traumatic material. These all reflect the impact that working with individuals in trouble and who are troubled may bring to our lives. First, we'll talk some about burnout. In this profession, we're on the cutting edge of change, and most often because of that, conflict becomes a part of the scenario that we encounter every day. Our work can be frustrating, there's a lot of pressure dealing with human need, and sometimes our emotions seem overwhelming to us, and a lot of times the results of our work don't become apparent for quite some time, and so there's little reward there in terms of feedback that we're doing the right thing. Out of these kinds of issues grows burnout sometimes, and you see the term burnout to become extinguished through a lack of fuel. Sometimes we refer to it as secondary trauma or vicarious trauma, secondary stress, compassion fatigue, but again, each of those are unique in its own definition, and they're similar in other ways and can be confused with one another. It's vital to recognize that these conditions can develop in our work and to know there are some things we can do to counteract them before and after they occur. As far as burnout goes, some things that workers can do to armor against burnout or to deal with it is first to be aware of the changing social climate and be realistic in evaluating its impact on people. And that includes its impact on our own work and ourselves as well. Another thing is to be committed to securing both basic and ongoing learning about your work. Training is something that can really give you a fresh perspective and new motivation to try new things in your interventions with your clients. Be careful to select the field of practice that interests you and that you can enjoy. And allow yourself to consider changing the focus of your social work career if necessary after a time, maybe looking for new roles, a new employer, or a different practice area within the field. That's one of the great things about the social work profession is there are so many different areas of practice and new challenges in each area for you. We have to learn to manage our individual workloads effectively and efficiently and responsibly, and to work with our colleagues cooperatively. We need to possess and maintain a personal value system that is consistent with human services, even when it may run contrary to accepted social values. So the question, can a conservative function successfully in a social work field? I believe they can, but I also would say that I believe that they need to be willing to make a commitment to the less than conservative values in the social work code of ethics and to be able to work with that. This involves something about separating one's personal lives from one's professional life. Although, if there's too great of a difference between the two, it may be very difficult to function in the field. Also, we should find a personal lifestyle that is satisfying so that we're able to distance ourselves from work when we leave it. These are things that are suggested by Levine in her book, and I would also add, be realistic in your expectations of yourself. You're not a super person. You're a human being doing the best work you can, and you can only do what you can do. Be realistic in your expectations of your client. Don't expect them to change because you want them to change. Even sometimes when you're using your best skills possible, it's not enough to help lead the client to the kind of change you're hoping that you'll see with them. Be realistic in your expectations for the outcome of your practice. That follows the other two. And don't personalize any client dependency, client resistance, or client failure to progress. It isn't about you. Being aware of social change involves remaining alert to the trends that impact our clients and our work, the changing social values, the attitudes and resources that are available to them, and also being aware of the social risk involved in bringing about and advocating for institutional and policy change. Sometimes this work is very important to do, this advocacy, this agitation, but there's also a risk associated with such work. There must be boat rockers if we are not going to stagnate, however. Securing basic and ongoing learning means that we must be committed to the development of our knowledge and practice skills on an ongoing basis. Constant training, retraining, looking at new areas. If you don't have training sessions made available, let yourself read a book from time to time that is related to your work. Although, make sure you also read a few things that are not associated with work as well. But gaining new knowledge helps us in the process of helping others because it gives us the capacity to be creative and to find new interventions to help our clients. Select a field of practice with which we are compatible. This is very, very critical. Do you want to create policy? If so, you want to think about macro social work. Do you want to work directly with people? Then you're really more focused on micro work. But one goes hand in hand with the other. And even in micro work, you're going to be doing some macro policy work as well. If you don't know that yet, you'll see it someday. Do you want to do private practice or do you want to do agency work? There are advantages and disadvantages to both. And I know that many people enter into social work with this dream of opening up their own office and not having a boss and setting their own hours and maybe even choosing the clients they serve and charging a lot of money in the process. But as you begin to explore private practice, talk to other people who are in private practice and learn about the issues associated with that because it's not all peaches and cream by any stretch of the imagination. And along with private practice goes a lot of extra responsibility. Agency work can be frustrating if you have to do things you're not particularly interested in or you can't do things you want to do, but There are benefits to agency work that sometimes makes it very attractive to stay with agency work throughout your career. And then finally, what area of practice are you most interested in? Do you want to work with the military? Do you want to work with kids? Do you want to work with intimate partner violence? Do you want to work with women? Do you want to work with the elderly, the disabled, on and on and on? There are so many different areas of practice, and try to find one or two that are particularly interesting to you and get a job there. But allow yourself to consider a change in the focus of your social work career. Do you want a new role in your agency? Maybe you want to move into a supervisory role or something along that line. Would it be useful to consider looking to another employer but staying in direct practice in what you're doing? Is there a different area of practice that might enliven your commitment to your work and your enjoyment of it? And if so, don't be afraid to make the change. Stability is really helpful for our clients, and I'm not encouraging you to move through different jobs over and over and over again, but change can be good for the psyche of the worker as well. Managing your workload means, first of all, putting yourself at an appropriate level of expectation where you can be comfortable and you can be competent. Mature workers don't put themselves in positions that set themselves up for burnout. And it means also being efficient in your workload management. Look for an approach that will allow you to systematically approach your responsibilities. In order to maintain accountability, this means you have to be responsible for what you do and for improving the quality of service. Referring back to an earlier discussion I had, don't deny that you make decisions. Don't convince yourself that the decisions are made for you and you're just a cog in the machine. You are making decisions constantly in your work, and it's important that you take responsibility for those decisions. You have to constantly evaluate and reevaluate what you're doing. And don't allow the old maxim, the squeaky wheel gets the grease, to become your MO. I've seen this happen often with workers, particularly when they have large caseloads, where their social work is reactive rather than proactive. And so instead of planning how to make sure they get out and see all of their clients or interact with all of their clients, including the quiet ones and the ones who seem to be doing okay, instead of doing that, they become reactive and they sit and wait for the phone, and they move from crisis to crisis to crisis. Of course, those crises develop in part because they're not out there being proactive and working with clients before they get there. So while there are times when you have to give up the priorities for your day because something emerges in your caseload and you have to drop your plans and create new plans and set things aside till later, remember to get back to those things you're setting aside till later. It's important that everybody gets your attention. The accountability should be to your clients, to your colleagues and the agency, and to society on a larger scale. Remember, know how to keep professional records and be sure to keep up to date with them. Social workers want to talk to people. They want to be out there interacting with their clients, and paperwork and computer work seems to be such a drudge on their day that it's something they don't want to work. But it's very, very important that you set aside time to keep your records for a variety of reasons, because you're accountable, you're responsible for those records. Sometimes if you're in an agency where you're billing for services, billing depends upon your documentation. Your documentation creates a record that when another worker steps in with your client, they know what you've done and they don't have to repeat all that stuff again. It is always likely that you will have more work to accomplish than can be accomplished reasonably. Be ready for this and develop strategies to deal with it. What about your personal value system? You have to be aware of what that is, and you have to assess the consistency of your own value system with those on which the human services are based. And again, I do believe that it's possible to have personal political philosophies or social philosophies that aren't necessarily in line with most people in the field, but you have to be able to turn those values off, so to speak, and work with the values of the social work profession and the code of ethics when you're working with your clients. Harboring too many internal inconsistencies doesn't lead to personal comfort, and it certainly doesn't give you job satisfaction. It is certainly not good for your mental health. If you wonder if your personal values are going to line up with the kinds of values you have to have in your work, you may take comfort in the knowledge that as training and experience and exposure to client needs continue, consistency in values can be developed between the two systems. And develop a healthy personal life as well. Job burnout results from the stresses that workers cannot cope with and cannot be confined to the workplace. A healthy personal life is the best armor possible to deal with stresses on the job. Self-care is so critical. Doing this involves maintaining health in all areas of your life: the physical, the emotional, the personal, the spiritual, and the intellectual. When you leave work, leave work. Burnout can be fairly easily resolved. Changing jobs can provide immediate relief to someone that's experiencing job-related burnout, although it's not necessarily the one I want to encourage all of you to do, because I think we want to keep you in your job if you have good experience, but look for other ways to relieve burnout. Compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma aren't solved quite so simply. And it's possible that you may experience both compassion fatigue and vicarious trauma at the same time. But these things tend to accumulate over time and become evident in both the personal and professional lives. And this is oftentimes an occupational hazard of working in the helping field. So we have to take measures if we want to stay in this field for a long time to be sure that we don't allow these conditions to develop. Whether it's burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma may not matter all that much, although it's important that we understand the contributing factors that lead to each. And the more we know about the problem, the more able we are to develop our strategies to prevent to begin with, or at least modulate the impact of what we experience. There's a self-test out on the web called the ProQual. That is the Professional Quality of Life self-test, and it's a way of measuring burnout, compassion fatigue, and vicarious trauma. And if you're interested in seeing how you do, you might want to go ahead and go to the website and try it out. I don't have the website posted here, but if you type in ProQual, as I have it spelled out here, it'll take you to the self-test. And by the way, it is an internet self-test. It may have some legitimacy to it, but don't let it make a determination of what you do with your career. Researchers have discovered that helpers, when they are overtaxed by the nature of their work, begin to show symptoms that are very similar to their traumatized clients. This is vicarious trauma or compassion fatigue sometimes. And the symptoms can negatively affect the workplace and create actually a toxic work environment. The worker experiencing these conditions will have difficulty concentrating. Sometimes will have intrusive imagery in their minds. They feel very discouraged about the world, hopeless, exhausted, irritable. Oftentimes there's a high attrition in the offices where these conditions exist, and there are many negative outcomes. People leaving feeling very dispirited, or perhaps worse, cynical workers remaining in the field, sometimes violating boundaries because they're trying to create change that they can't create by keeping professional distance and so on. There are some strategies to prevent compassion fatigue, and here's some examples of it. First of all, self-care, which is always at the top of any list. Any activity to take care of mental, emotional, or physical health. Things like yoga, taking a bath, drinking up a cup of tea, listening to music, playing with your kids, petting your dog, all those kinds of things. Healthy boundaries. Very important to set emotional, mental, and physical limits and put your own needs first. Sometimes saying no to tasks when in a time crunch, asking for help when you need it, delegating tasks to others when it's possible. Now, you're not always able to do those things in every job you're in, but these are things to consider at least and to look and see what you can do about that. One thing that you can always do with healthy boundaries is, again, keep work at work. Don't take work home. If you have to work late hours, and I hope you don't, but if you do, my suggestion is to stay at your desk. Don't carry caseloads home. First of all, in most offices, that's a violation of policy and a potential violation of confidentiality. But beyond that, when you go home, you should know you're away from work, and it'll enable you to be more rested and enjoy the people around you better. Maintain your support network. You can't go home and talk to your spouse or your friends or your kids about your client's problems because it's confidential information. And so it's a little more difficult to get the support you need in the work, but you can call a friend after a stressful day at work or look for other ways that individuals can provide support to you. They know you're in a difficult job. Be self-aware. Pay attention to your thoughts and feelings, your interactions with others, your general stress and anxiety level, and try to look for ways to address that, including such things as meditation, mindfulness activities, keeping a journal, other kinds of reflective activities. These are good for the soul. Maintain a balance in your life. Manage time to balance work with life responsibilities, your personal relationships, your self-care activities. All these things are equally important. Human services delivery requires the knowledgeable and disciplined use of the worker's self. If the self is always involved in the worker still has a responsibility to discipline the use of the self and make sure it's used appropriately and that appropriate boundaries are respected. It's a transactional process working with people. There's a give and a take between and among the people involved. Still, the worker has to develop a personal objectivity about the work and realize that it's not their life that they're working with here, it is their clients' lives. People are endowed with the need and the capacity to relate to others. To free themselves to better use their innate capacity to relate, workers often may need to look to an experience in re-education. New training in their field, a new field altogether, those kinds of things all are things that could be considered. Take care of yourself. Take on these challenges that are presented by burnout, compassion fatigue, vicarious trauma. Don't let them defeat you. Try to prevent them from developing, and if you see signs that they're there, do things to relieve those issues. Take care of yourself. Live your life outside of work. Practice employing healthy boundaries on your work life. That means go home on time. Take your breaks. Take your lunch hour. Don't work at your desk through lunch. Don't take work home. Take the vacations that you've earned. Pursue your family life, your hobbies, your recreational opportunities, stress reduction activities. All these things are so vital in maintaining your own emotional health and stability in this field. Keep a healthy diet. This is also something that's very important. Physical recreation, stress reduction activities all have something to do with this. Make sure that you're also eating properly. And don't overuse intoxicants. Early in my career, I had a young adolescent who I was working with who became very attached to me. And in fact, to be honest, I became very attached to him. And some months into our professional relationship, he accidentally killed himself huffing aerosols. My supervisor knew of the special connection that I felt with this boy and was very good about helping me deal with the after effects of that, talked with me about it, encouraged me to stay on the job as much as possible, to keep my mind working with other people. And one of the things that I remember her saying, above all, don't go home and get drunk. We have to deal with our emotions, and using substances, whether it's alcohol or pot or some other drug, using those substances in order to manage our emotions is not going to help us resolve the conflict that they create. We should face our difficulties and work through those emotions. That's something we encourage our clients to do. We need to practice that ourselves. Make sure you get good rest. Learn new skills. Look for new areas of professional interests. All these things will keep you fresh. And if there's inefficiencies in your agency's bureaucracy, and I shouldn't say if, I should say when you identify those inefficiencies in your agency's bureaucracy that contribute to the failure of your work, raise questions and issues with your administrators, but do it in a helpful way. Do it in a way that they can hear you. And if you're challenging the existing order, understand that there will be resistance to those changes. Keep a focus on what's best for the clients that you share with your administrators. And try to keep your advocacy pointed in the direction of clients rather than on your own needs. It's going to go a long way to helping you achieve the kinds of changes that you feel are necessary. Here's a story I'll read to you, and you've probably heard this before, but if not, and even if you have, I think this is a good little story to consider as we cover this topic. A lecturer, when explaining stress management to an audience, raised a glass of water and asked, "How heavy is this glass of water?" The answers called out ranged from 20 grams to 550 grams. The lecturer replied, "The absolute weight doesn't matter. It depends on how long I try to hold it. If I hold it for a minute, that's not a problem. If I hold it for an hour, I'll have an ache in my right arm. And if I hold it for a day, you might have to call an ambulance. In each case, it's the same weight, but the longer I hold it, the heavier it becomes." He continued, and that's the way it is with stress. If we carry our burdens all the time, sooner or later, as the burden becomes increasingly heavy, we won't be able to carry on. As with this glass of water, you have to put it down for a while and rest before holding it again. When we're refreshed, we can carry on with the burden. So before you return home tonight, put the burden of work down. don't carry it home. You can pick it up tomorrow. Whatever burdens you're carrying now, let them down for a moment if you can, and don't pick them up again until you've rested a while. The human condition ensures that we'll never attain a problem-free existence. But in the struggle itself lies opportunity for growth and development. I think that's a great thought to carry with us into our work in social work. No greater challenges or satisfactions exist in work than come to us in working with people. There's no occupation I can identify that has any greater importance. So workers who continue to learn, to study, and to use the insights they gain will enjoy the greater freedom and use of self that is the most fulfilling reward of education. Good luck to all of you in your careers. I hope that you carry with you some of these thoughts and take care of yourselves in your work. You'll be better able to help your clients if you also help yourself. Take care.